And as many of you know, I was on television last night on RT America. We were talking a little bit about ISIS and the threat to ISIS and how we kind of fix that problem. And news out of America today, apparently ISIS or ISIL or the Islamic State, whatever you want to call it, has blown up the historic Wall of Nineveh. The Wall of Nineveh runs through the city of Mosul. And I thought I would start it today just by telling you a little story. It's a story I haven't ever told anyone about when I first went to Mosul. I was part of a team, or a group of people who went over there, and my job was to provide security to State Department officials as part of a provincial reconstruction team. Folks that were building roads and drilling wells and trying to create structure and stability after Saddam had been ousted. And I'm flying into Jordan. And at this point, I have a friend in Mosul who's operating there, and he has told me, well, I think that we're going to try and get you up to Mosul. If not, you'll be in Baghdad with a different team down there. And so as I arrived in Jordan, the way it would typically work is you would fly into Jordan, and you would have to stay there for a day to 3 days, depending on the risk factor and how quickly they could get the planes running back and forth. And so you typically had a holding pattern time period in Jordan. Now, that was an extremely nice little holdover because all your food was paid for. They put you up in a really nice room, and you've got some internet access and stuff like that. So I go down to check my email, and my buddy had basically told me, look, I don't know whether we're going to be able to get you up here or not. We're all filled up. We don't need any other guys, so you may have to hang out in Baghdad for a little bit until we can get you up here when a spot opens up. And I thought, well, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I go down to check my email, and my buddy said, hey, I got an email from my buddy, and he said, hey, when are you getting here? Something happened. And that was it. And I said, well, I'm trying to get there as soon as I can get on a plane and get into country. And he said, okay. And so I end up showing up in Baghdad. I roll up, and I said, hey, I'm supposed to go up north to Mosul. My buddy is supposed to be yada, yada. And the guys say, yeah, well, basically they said, you don't tell us, we tell you. And I said, well, that's fine, man. I'm telling you what they told me. And sure enough, they said, yeah, you're gonna go on up there. And so I hopped on a helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, and started my flight up to Mosul. I actually ended up flying up with a couple of State Department guys, and it's not really relevant to this story, but would be relevant in a longer discussion of what happened there. But I remember flying in the Black Hawk helicopter and looking down out the side of the helicopter and seeing a man tending sheep. And I thought, this is awesome. I've been in country all of 24 hours, and I've just seen my first shepherd. My first real Middle Eastern shepherd. There he is. He's out there in the middle of the desert, tending his flock. This is great. And I arrived on the forward operating base in Mosul, and I get off the helicopter, and the team is there waiting for me, and they load me up. I still don't have any idea what had happened. They take me back, and they said, yeah, we just had 4 guys get killed yesterday. And I was like, oh,
great to be here.
Thanks. So I'm the guy that replaces the 4 guys who died. That's awesome. Great. And it turns out that they were on a run. The Wall of Nineveh runs along a major thoroughfare through the city of Mosul. And as you're driving, and we would make this run constantly, we would constantly try and vary our route because it was very dangerous there. Mosul was, even at that time in 2005, extremely dangerous place to be. And we would run down the road, and we would constantly be changing up the roads that we took to try and confuse people who were trying to kill us. There was like 21 improvised explosive devices or car bombs a day that went off in Mosul when I worked there and operated there. And what had happened was these guys had been on a run, and it was a run that they had changed their schedule at the last minute. They had done everything right. And as they were running down the road, what ended up happening was another vehicle came off of an on-ramp, because they have some highway systems there. They're not nearly as nice as the ones here in America, but they have highway systems. And they were on one of the highways, and a vehicle had merged onto the highway and had swerved to try and hit their principal's vehicle, the person that they were protecting. And the principal's vehicle took off, and what happened was the follow vehicle, the vehicle that was behind the vehicle housing the person that they were protecting, ended up moving to protect the principal's vehicle. And when those two vehicles touched, the person in the other vehicle detonated a car bomb. And it picked up a 2,000-pound up-armored Suburban and threw that Suburban 400 yards across 4 lanes of traffic into the wall of Nineveh, where it then, left as a piled heap of rubble, of burning ash on the side of the road and twisted steel. They think that that particular suicide bomber was going after a military convoy because a military convoy had passed them just prior to this vehicle hitting the road. So what they think was the primary target was the military convoy. That's why it was so laden and laid down with explosives. It was a huge, huge explosion for that type of car bomb and for that type of target. So they think what they were after were some of the larger military vehicles and hoping to get one of those. And instead, he had to settle for one of our up-armored Suburbans. And there my guys were. They ended up running into, immediately after that, they ran into an ambush. And so they ended up stopping, deploying, fighting the enemy, and then ending up and setting up a perimeter on the street around the car, that the Suburban that had just been blown up. And one of the things to his credit, that one of the men I operated under when I worked there was arguably the best leader that I have ever worked for. Just an incredible man. And I had a lot of respect for him at the time for his leadership and just the way he cared for the people who worked for him in that area. And he said to the guys, he said, we're not gonna leave our people here for somebody else to take care of. And so he said, I want you to get some trash bags out, and I want you to get as much of them as you can. You can't get into the vehicles to get them out, but I want you to get as much as you can. So here are my future friends. They weren't my friends at the time. I didn't know them. Standing on the side of the road, picking up pieces of their dead friends and putting them into plastic bags so that the enemy didn't get it, and so that the U.S. Army wasn't the one who took care of our people. That was what I walked into when I went into Mosul, coming right off the backs of these 4 men being killed and me being one of the replacements for that. To their great credit, they accepted me with open arms. They treated me like a member of the team from the day I arrived, and I spent the next 7 months operating in that area, trying not to get killed. Our convoy was hit twice. It was actually hit the first time that I went out on a run with them. The follow vehicle was nearly struck by an explosion or a bomb that was buried in the side of the road. And then another time, the lead vehicle in one of the convoys that I was in was struck by an improvised explosive device, a roadside bomb, while we were held up in traffic. And it's a very, very dangerous place there. I say all of that to lead up to this, because the question will be, how do we fight this kind of enemy? Should we be fighting this kind of enemy? We've heard the stories about Iraq, about the ISIS and some of the other groups that are destroying 3,000-year-old statues. They're trying to eradicate history and anything that is not directly tied to their version of Islam. They're murdering and butchering people who oppose them. They're selling women into sex slavery. What responsibility do we have as Americans, and how do we fight this enemy? I heard on Glenn Beck this morning, Glenn was talking a little bit about World War III and how he thinks that what we're really heading towards is World War III, and what they really want, what ISIS wants, is to pick a fight. They want us coming because they want to start what they think is going to lead to the reestablishment of the caliphate. And I've been very outspoken about this. I don't think this is a war that you win. I think that the way that you win this war is through disengaging, by not giving the enemy what it needs and what it wants. I think we've created this enemy by funding them, by going in and using a doctrine of preemption in order to establish a foothold. But our attempts to nation build in the Middle East have been utter failures, from Iraq to Egypt to Libya, and to Syria. And I had posted some of my thoughts on Voices of Liberty, and Ben Swan, who is an Emmy award-winning journalist, ended up sending me an email and said, hey, I've done a piece on ISIS. And I said, I know, I've seen it. It was excellent. He said, I'm going on RT America, and I would like to have you come on and share a little bit about ISIS and your experience and what you think we need to do. Darren, go ahead and play. This is a clip from me talking with him about ISIS and about the problems that we've created, and how do we solve this issue?
Tell me, so is it difficult, for the U.S. to, after we've, pushed this role in the creation of ISIS, to simply step back now and take our hands off and say, it's not our problem anymore? How do we do that?
That's the hardest thing that you could possibly do, because we created the mess. But the problem is, if you look at U.S. policy and what we've done so far in our nation-building campaign to first oust Saddam and then later Egypt, Mubarak, and then later Libya and Syria, we see that in every single case what we've done is create massive power vacuums. And as you've correctly reported on over the course of your piece here, what you've really created is the necessity of a U.S. military in order to provide stability, because there is no solid, stable foundation there. You got to ask yourself the question, how did the evil dictators become evil dictators? Well, they became the evil dictator in a now functioning and stable country because they were able to fend off all of the other evil potential dictators that weren't able to come to power because they were the most brutal and the most successful at achieving and controlling the populace. And so to suggest that somehow you're going to turn that over and you're going to have a bunch of people who are going to come in and we're going to establish a functional republic in Iraq or in Egypt, and that these guys we're going to have an Arab Spring and everybody's going to love freedom and liberty in those parts of the world, that's not the way it works there. And the idea that you're going to do that is really a failure of U.S. policy, a massive failure and a massive misunderstanding of the way the world actually works and the way the Middle East is structured.
And so, folks, what I was trying to get across, and one of the things is that, there was no prep for this. I just simply went in. I didn't know what questions he was going to ask me, and I just answered the questions that he gave me. And when you go home, you're always thinking, well, man, I wish I had kind of had enough time, but you're trying not to filibuster him. I didn't want to be President Obama on there. I wanted to give him time to ask questions, so I was trying to be clear and concise in my responses to him. But what I really wanted to share, and what I now have the ability to do with the bully pulpit and the microphone in front of me, is to share with you in a little bit more detail exactly what I meant by that. And it's being able to spend time in the Middle East and understanding the structure of these particular groups. One of the things that people have a radical misunderstanding about is who these groups are. There's not one group. There's not ISIS. ISIS is the biggest one right now, and they were able to come to power, and they were able to gain that strength and support because the U.S. funded them. And then the U.S. had created a vacuum in Iraq when it pulled out, leaving ISIS well-funded, well-armed, the ability to come in and fill that vacuum against a very inept and weak Iraqi army. And the question is now, how do we get out of this? And the only way to get out of it is to disengage. There is no, I would question anybody to provide me a better answer than pull out. Because if you say, well, we're going to put ground troops back in. Okay, for how long? What is your objective? Well, to beat back the terrorists. Well, what does that look like? Because that's what we did with Saddam. That's what we did in Afghanistan. We beat them back. And then we end up fighting these little guerrilla forces the whole time and try and build up an external army. And you mark my words, Afghanistan is going to turn out the same way Iraq did. The Afghan military is weak and cowardice. It will fall to those extremists who are willing to die to reestablish the caliphate. So how long are we going to stay? As I told him, I didn't pull the clip for today, but as I told Ben, I said, unless you intend to turn Iraq into a U.S. province, then there's no purpose in going there. Because at some point you will leave. At some point you will be pulled back and expect the Iraqis or the Afghans to take over. And we spent 10 years training their army. 10 years. Only to see it fail at the very first fight. So how long should we stay? How long should Americans risk their lives in order to provide stability and liberty to the Iraqis or to the Syrians or to the Libyans? How much blood and coin must we spend in order to ensure that? The question is, there will never be enough. It will never be over. Iraq, Egypt, Libya, and Syria were run by dictators. There is no doubt about that. But one thing that we had there was stability. One thing that everybody understood was how those particular people reacted. We knew what to expect from them. And in some cases, like in the case of Mubarak, we had a sympathetic government in Egypt. Now we have a wreck, a train wreck. And the very next step is Netanyahu, who has come to the U.S. trying to convince and gain support for a preemptive war against Iran. They may very well be trying to push us into World War III, but the only way we get there is if we continue this cycle of preemptive conflict and nation building in order to try and fix the world. America should be a shining beacon on the hill for liberty, for anyone who can get here. It says, we will protect you here. If you come here, liberty will be safe. You will be free if you come here. But we cannot protect you out there.